So there are allegations circulating from all these media outlets that there's a whistleblower in the intelligence community that claims that he overheard Trump saying something that was very troubling and he reported it to the intelligence inspector general. And now there's a big debate on whether or not that information should be released to Congress. So I wanted to go through exactly what this is about. There are now allegations that this has something to do with his conversations with the president of the Ukraine and possibly paying or withholding money for the Ukraine unless they investigate Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and the fact that Joe Biden withheld $1 billion loan when he was vice president until they fired the prosecutor that was looking into his son's company. Now, it's a very confusing situation, and I really want to break this down. So what this video is going to do is I'm going to go through two articles. The first is an article that is left-leaning and is making the argument that Joe Biden didn't do anything wrong as his case as vice president. And then the second is one that's more neutral, that's making the case that there's some shady stuff going on possibly. So let's talk about what this means at the top. First off, this is proof of what Trump's been saying, what people like me have been saying all along, that people in the intelligence community are out to get Trump and they're listening into his conversations constantly. He wasn't just battling the intelligence community before he was elected, as I've outlined many times, in the fact that FISA abuse and that he was being spied on by the intelligence community. The spying continues to this day. For example, I'm sure if the American people got to hear everything Barack Obama said to foreign leaders on phone, we might have been outraged at many of the things he said as well. But I digress. The situation is what it is. Now, could this mean that Trump gets in trouble? It depends on exactly what he said. For me, no matter what they say, they're going to say this is terrible for Trump. And it's going to prove the hypocrisy of the media and the Democrats in their way of doing it, as I'll explain in a moment. But let's start with what's the worst possible thing Trump could have said and whether or not I think that that's reason for him to be punished in some way. Theoretically, the worst thing I could imagine Trump saying, if it's true that this situation involves the Ukraine, is I will withhold this aid from you if you don't prosecute or if you don't find Biden's son guilty and Biden himself guilty of what they did. That would be very shady because that's him saying that you have to find the outcome of your investigation that I want. That would be the worst possible thing. And if he offered money or offered some sort of aid to find Biden or his son guilty, that would be very problematic, I think. But keep in mind, we don't have any proof that that's what occurred. Now, what's more likely is he could have said something to the effect of, we have an investigation going on into Hunter Biden's company, which is Joe's son. His name's Hunter. And we would like your cooperation on this to figure out what was going on before we're able to give you aid. Now, that seems like that could, depending on how he put it, it could be slightly problematic, but I don't think it's that big of a deal because what he's saying is we have a criminal investigation going on that has to do with your country and business that was occurring in your country, and we would like your cooperation on it before we give aid. That's common in many countries where if there's some kind of ongoing investigation, the United States government will be hesitant to help a country until they help with that case, whether it be looking into the Taliban, looking into organized crime, etc. So there could be tenuousness there, but we don't know. To me, though, that's not the real story. And as I've said repeatedly, if Donald Trump broke laws, if he committed crimes, he should be held accountable for them like anyone else. I stand by that. But to me, the real story is we've known about this Hunter Biden situation since 2014, 2015. Yet the media has said almost nothing. The Democrats have said almost nothing. Here's just a nutshell, and I'll get to these articles that explain the specific situation, but in a nutshell, here's what happened. I'm not going to get into the actual in-depth of what the crimes that Hunter Biden's company was accused of, but suffice it to say there was enough going on that there was investigations within the Ukraine that this company that Joe Biden's son was on the board of directors was getting all sorts of shadiness. Also, I'd like to talk just real quick briefly. There's also accusations that Joe Biden's son was involved with other shady characters in a business deal in China at the exact same time that Joe Biden was negotiating with China. So anyways, let's just focus on the Ukraine. But it's not just Ukraine. There's also things happening in China. Anyways, prosecutors are beginning to look into this company that Joe Biden's son's on the board of directors of. Biden, we know, as I'll get to in these articles, fully admits on video that he was the man in charge. Obama gave him permission to be the man in charge of whether or not to give this $1 billion loan to the Ukraine, a guaranteed loan. And basically Biden went in and said, you will not get this loan unless you fire the prosecutor. Now, this is a prosecutor that happened to be looking into his son. So the Ukraine did fire that prosecutor, and we know that the investigation into the company that Biden's son was on the board of directors promptly stopped thereafter. That's the full story. Those facts are not in dispute. Now, the defense of Biden is, yeah, but this prosecutor was shady anyways, so it wasn't that Biden wanted him fired because he was looking into his son. It was that Biden wanted him fired because the guy was just shady to get with. But that's not going to matter, and this is the story. The story is the media and the Democrats' corruption in this. I picture this scenario for a second. Don Jr. has a company in the Ukraine. He's on the board of directors in a company in the Ukraine. They start to be investigated by prosecutors in the Ukraine. Donald Trump calls the Ukraine and says, hey, we'll guarantee you this $1 billion loan if you fire the prosecutor if you fire this prosecutor, because I think the prosecutor's corrupt. And it happens to be the prosecutor looking into his son. Do you really not think that the media and the Democrats would go absolutely insane over that? I have 100% proof they were, and here's why. The media has been trying to make the accusation that Trump has some sort of business interest in Russia since before he was even elected. That's why they want his tax returns. That's why they wanted to talk about the Trump Tower deal. All of that they focus on as a huge deal. The reason is because they feel that Trump went soft on Russia, which he didn't. Trump's actually been harder on Russia than even Obama was. But they claim that Trump's policy prescriptions towards Russia that they thought were too soft on them was actually because he had some sort of business deal, or he owed Putin something, or he owed Russians something, or Russians were making him money. That's why they're looking into his tax returns. That's why they're so concerned about the Trump Tower deal in Russia. That's what all this is about. Now, one, we don't have any proof that Trump has these sorts of deals in Russia. That's what they're trying to find out. And second, we have no proof whatsoever that even if he does have some sort of deal in Russia, that his policy prescriptions were in fact because he had these business deals in Russia. Yet despite that, the media has gone nuts for 3 months. Remember Rachel Maddow? We got tax returns. There was a Russian guy with a boat that parked next to Trump's boat. All of those stories that are still going and ongoing today, they're still going after his taxes. That's what all of this is about. So if they're foaming at the mouth over that, imagine if we had proof that not only Trump had business deals in Russia, but then he enforced some sort of policy saying, I'm going to withhold aid to you unless you stop the prosecutor that's looking into my business deals. Do you really not think that the media would go nuts and say that's a huge deal? Yet that's exactly what happened with Joe Biden. And they haven't said anything since 2015 when this has been known. That's 4 years when they've been almost totally silent. The Dems aren't speaking up. And it's not just Joe Biden, by the way, who would be indicted in this. Biden admits, and we know that Obama knew what was going on. So Obama signed off on this. He was the one, the buck stops with him. So and listen, here's the other thing which I'll talk about. It doesn't matter if there were other reasons this prosecutor was shady. If we go back to the situation with Don Jr., if it was Don Jr.'s company, do you think the media and the Democrats would accept, well, the prosecutor was shady in other ways? A bunch of other organizations said, yep, this prosecutor that Trump demanded be fired was shady in a bunch of other ways. It wouldn't matter. They would say the conflict of interest of Trump saying that this prosecutor who was looking into his son needed fired, it didn't matter if there were other good reasons. Just the optics of that shows a conflict of interest. They wouldn't accept, there were other reasons to fire him. You know it. Everyone knows that. So let's go through. First, we'll start with the left-wing source that's saying it's only a half-truth, that they're basically what this article is going to do is it'll show us outline some of the facts. And by the way, this is a problem with biased media in the first place. It'll get the facts, but then it jumps to conclusions and it makes the conclusions it want. Both these pieces will do that, by the way. Though I think the Hill piece is far more credible and far more at least attempting to be in the middle of the road. So what this article is going to claim is, yes, it is true that Biden demanded this guy be fired. Yes, it is true that Hunter Biden was on the board of directors of the company that this prosecutor was looking into. But there's no way that we positively know that Biden wanted this guy fired because he was looking into his son. And as I'm arguing, that doesn't matter. That wouldn't stop them from freaking out if it was Trump. Well, we don't have... It's always when it's the Democrats. You have to have 100% proof. If there's a 1% chance that Biden didn't fire him for this reason or demand he be fired for this reason, then it's somehow acceptable. That's ridiculous. It's not. It was a conflict of interest, and it should be the other way around. Biden should not have been allowed to get away with this unless we had 100% proof it did have nothing to do with his son. Anyways, let's get to the article specifically. This is from PolitiFact, just so you know. So I'm just going to start here. Is it true, as this image suggests, that Hunter Biden was serving as director to the Ukraine's largest private gas producer when the elder Biden threatened to withhold $1 billion in U.S. aid if the Ukraine didn't fire the prosecutor looking into the company? Key takeaways. Hunter Biden did hold a directorship for a Ukrainian gas company while his father was vice president. Experts agree that Hunter Biden's acceptance of the position created a conflict of interest as his father. Okay, so even this article and all the Democrats agree this was a bad look. It was a conflict of interest for his father. Okay, this is the left-wing site saying that. Moving on. Vice President Joe Biden did urge Ukraine to fire its top prosecutor with the threat of withholding U.S. aid. But that was the position of the wider U.S. government as well as other international institutions. That's ridiculous. That doesn't matter. I mean, all I can say is picture any Republican doing this. Picture Trump threatening to fire a prosecutor in the United States that was looking into him. But then he gets like 7 or other organizations to say, well, this prosecutor's been alleged to have all sorts of other wrongdoings. People would say it doesn't matter. Trump forced the guy who was looking into him out of office. It's the same here. It doesn't matter if this guy was involved in other shady business. The U.S. didn't force that guy out. Biden didn't force that prosecutor out until after, because apparently this Ukrainian prosecutor, Shokin, was involved in shadiness for years, they claim. But it wasn't until he started looking into Biden's son's company that finally the United States said, we're going to withhold aid unless you get rid of this person. That is ridiculous. And they already admit the fact that Hunter Biden was there is a huge conflict of interest. So it's clear that they're just being disingenuous and saying, well, yes, it was a conflict of interest that Hunter Biden was on this company, but just because Biden, and yes, Biden did say that they were going to withhold $1 billion unless that prosecutor got fired, but, you know, no big deal. It's ridiculous. Lastly, we find no evidence to support the idea that Joe Biden advocated with his son's interest in mind, as the message suggests. It's not even clear the company was actively under investigation or that a change in prosecutors benefited it. Okay, we'll get to that bottom comment in a second, but they found no evidence that Biden advocated with his son's interest in mind. Well, let's see when they're now talking about the Trump situation, and this is the irony with this. The media is trying to make the following 2 claims at the same time. 1, no problem just because Biden's son was being looked at by this prosecutor for Biden to demand he be fired and threaten $1 billion of aid over it. 2nd, it's a huge problem if Trump would have contacted the Ukraine and said, I want these crimes looked at, and offered some sort of aid or to remove some sort of aid if that occurred. Those 2 statements can't be true at the same time. Because why couldn't I just make the argument, well, there's no proof that Trump did that for his own personal benefit. We don't have any. He could have just legitimately wanted the crimes looked at that he thought were actual crimes. Of course, the media won't give Trump the benefit of the doubt. They'll say, this guy's against him, Joe Biden. He's on the opposite political party. And Trump demanded that the Ukraine look into the crimes that he was alleged to have committed. Therefore, it must be for Trump's personal benefit. That's exactly what they'll say. And they're not wrong to make that assumption. But on the other hand, Joe Biden's son's being looked at by a prosecutor. Biden threatens to withhold $1 billion unless that prosecutor's fired. But that's not necessarily for Biden's son's personal benefit. We don't have 100% proof of that. You can't say that there's 100% proof of Trump, or that we need 100% proof before we say it's shady when Biden did it, but not for when Trump did it. What was Hunter Biden's role? Now, I warn you, and this is going to be a lengthy video, I warn you that the ins and outs of exactly what this company was accused of doing illegal becomes difficult. I'll read what they have written here, but it's not the important thing. All you need to know is there was a credible accusation and an ongoing investigation into this company. There's all sorts of shady things like the other article we'll talk about, which I'll kind of not hit on a lot, where Hunter Biden was actually getting money in kind of shady ways, and there was all sorts of shady connections with criminals going on with this company. But all you need to know, don't get bogged down in that. All you need to know is there was an investigation ongoing. My argument with this video isn't necessarily that Hunter Biden broke the law. It's just that he was being investigated and his dad forced the prosecutor looking into him to be fired. That's the important thing. It doesn't matter saying, well, Biden never really broke the law, or Hunter Biden never broke the law. That's irrelevant, but I'll still read the piece. Hunter Biden did hold a directorship with a natural gas company called Burisma Holdings beginning in spring of 2014. Reuters reported at the time that a statement on the company's website said younger Biden would help the company with transparency, corporate governance and responsibility, international expansion, and other issues. The company also retained a law firm where Biden had been working, Boies Schiller Flexner. The position with Burisma came at a time when the younger Biden had joined with Christopher Hines, the stepson of John Kerry, and Devin Archer, a Kerry family friend, in a string of investment and consulting firms. The firms ran by Biden and Archer pursued business deals. Moving on. Biden's Burisma dictatorship attracted the attention because Burisma was owned by Mykola Zelensky, a minister under Russia-friendly President Viktor Yanukovych, who was subsequently went into exile after the uprising. After Yanukovych was ousted, Zlochevsky faced a variety of corruption-laden investigations involving his businesses. So this guy, Zlochevsky, who was under the ousted Ukrainian president, had a bunch of his business being looked at for corruption, and this was who owned the company that Hunter Biden was working for. In 2015, Ukraine's newly appointed prosecutor general Viktor Shokin inherited some of the investigations into Zlochevsky and his company. So this prosecutor was looking into the company. Zlochevsky and the company have denied the allegations. Shokin was ousted as prosecutor in 2016. Shokin is the prosecutor the viral post is talking about. Did Biden know about his son's Ukrainian ties? The Biden campaign told Political Fact that the vice president learned about his son's role on the board through media reports and never discussed anything related to the company with his son. That's irrelevant. Do you think they would give Trump the same benefit of the doubt if it turns out that Don Jr. is actually is on the board of a director for a company owned by Vladimir Putin? Do you think that they would accept, Trump says he never talked to Don Jr. about his businesses? Of course not. In a White House brief from May 13, 2014, spokesman Jay Carney was asked about it and whether it presented a conflict of interest. Carney said, "I'd prefer you to the vice president's office." Skip the rest. A year and a half later, the New York Times published an article that suggested the credibility of the vice president's anti-corrupt message may have been undermined by Hunter Biden's dealings with the company. You think? In 2015 article, Kate Bedingfield, a spokeswoman for the vice president, played down any impact on Elder Biden's policies. Hunter Biden's a private citizen and lawyer, she said. The vice president does not endorse any particular company, has no involvement with this company. The vice president has pushed aggressively for years, both publicly and with groups like the U.S.-Ukraine Business Forum, and privately in meetings with Ukrainian leaders, for Ukraine to make every effort to investigate and prosecute corruption in accordance with the rule of law. It will once again be the key focus during this trip. We'll get to the other article, how that's not necessarily the case. But nonetheless, again, this is irrelevant. Do you think they would give the same benefit of the doubt to Trump? Oh, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that Don Jr., his son, was involved, or Eric Trump was involved in this investigation. Trump doesn't talk to his sons about that stuff. Of course not. Hunter Biden told the New York Times this month in a statement that at no time have I discussed with my father the company's business or my board service, including my initial decision to join the board. Well, it's quite clear because there were public reports that even if Joe Biden, isn't it ironic that Obama and now Joe Biden always make these same, I didn't know anything until I read it in the paper. Even if that's the case, there were public reports. Joe Biden knew that his son was on this company because of public reports, and he knew that this was the prosecutor that was looking into his son's business. It's absurd for him to claim otherwise. Did Biden make the threat to the Ukraine? The Post said Biden threatened to withhold $1 billion unless the prosecutor, Shokin, was fired. Biden didn't just make a threat to withhold unless Shokin was sacked. It succeeded. Biden proudly recounted the moment during an event sponsored on the Council on Foreign Relations in January 23, 2018. Here are the remarks. Now, this is going to be the crucial piece of evidence, and I'll get to later when I go to the next article why this is important as well. Here's Biden's quote. I remember going over to the Ukraine and convincing our team that we should be providing for loan guarantees, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko and from then Prime Minister Yatsenyuk that they would take action against State Prosecutor Shokin. And they didn't. They were walking out of a press conference and I said, nah, we're not going to give you $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I looked at them and said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor is not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time. Now, that last line is going to be important because Biden's admitting that the person that they put in, the prosecutor they put in place of Shokin was solid. He thought that person was good. That's a credible person. Okay, remember that in the future. But can you imagine if Trump did what he just said? Now, let's not hear any excuses that Obama didn't know. Biden admits, I'm the man. Call Obama. He said I could do this. You'll see. And he withheld this aid unless they fired the prosecutor that was looking into his son. That is incredible. Now, the media has known about this since 2015. The Dems have known about this. They've been foaming at the mouth trying to find that Trump has any business in Russia, to try to make the claim that that means that if he wanted to lift sanctions or if he wanted to try to de-escalate situations with Russia, that proves some kind of corruption and he should be impeached for it. Meanwhile, we have cut and dry. We know, not just removed sanctions or something, we literally have Joe Biden offering $1 billion to a country to fire the guy that's looking into his son's company. And the media says nothing. That's the real story, the corruption of the Democrats and the media. And the irony is, this whistleblower complaint, we'll see what ends up happening, but it's forcing them to talk about this. Why would Biden approaching Ukraine over firing? Now, this is where they get... Basically, their argument's going to be, well, a bunch of groups thought that Shokin, the prosecutor that was fired, was a bad dude. But that doesn't matter. Just because someone's a bad dude doesn't mean it's corrupt to demand their firing because they're looking into your son. You could say, well, it wasn't because they were looking into my son. It was a bunch of other reasons. Again, imagine that Trump does this. We're going to fire them. Trump's just like, I withhold all aid from New York City until the New York attorney, or I withhold all aid from New York. No government aid, no government programs allowed there until New York fires the attorney general that's looking into me and demanding my tax returns. And here's 10 other people that'll tell you that New York attorney general is a bad person and they're doing a terrible job. Do you think the media would be like, well, fair enough. All these other people say that the New York attorney general is doing a terrible job. So, yeah, I mean, of course, they're looking into Trump, but that's not why Trump demanded they be fired and withheld aid. Of course they wouldn't say that. So all of this that I'm about to read you, which I'll read it, it's irrelevant. I'm sure the guy was a bad dude. Okay? That doesn't mean that it's not corrupt for Biden to withhold $1 billion until they fire the guy that's looking into his son. There's a strong case that Hunter Biden's position in the company had nothing to do with Biden's position on Shokin's ouster. That's because Western leaders and institutions were largely united in seeking his removal, and he was not pursuing corruption cases aggressively. For instance, in early 2016, IMF chief Christine Lagarde said it's hard to see the IMF-supported program can continue unless corruption prosecutions accelerate. Steve Pfeiffer, a career foreign service official under the Ukraine under President Bill Clinton and President Deputy Secretary of State European and Eurasian Affairs under Bush, told PolitiFact that virtually everyone he knew in the U.S. government, virtually all non-governmental experts in the Ukraine, felt that Shokin was not doing his job and should be fired. As I could recall, they all concurred with the Vice President telling Poroshenko that the U.S. government would not accept $1 billion unless he was fired. Anders Aslin, a resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, a think tank in Washington, agreed that criticism of Shokin was widespread. Shokin failed to prosecute anybody's significance, protecting both Yanukovych and Circle and the Poroshenko group. Now, let's assume all this is true. First, these are all Washington insiders or elite establishment type people. Sure, they're all on board. A bunch of people that liked Obama and Joe Biden thought that the guy that was looking into Joe Biden's son deserved to be fired. Second, their reason that he wasn't investigating prosecution, particularly of Yanukovych, well, the guy that came in afterwards, basically they promptly shut down any investigations into the company that Hunter Biden's son was working for. So those prosecutions didn't occur anyways. Did we take the $1 billion back? No, because the U.S. was happy. Obama was happy because they stopped looking into Biden's son in that company. And it's humorous that all these people were so concerned that I just listed, so concerned about corruption in the Ukraine, yet they didn't have a problem with Joe Biden's son working with they have a problem with the prosecutor not arresting the corrupt people, but not with the vice president's son working with the actual corrupt people. Derek Kaluniak, the executive director of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, a leading anti-corruption voice in Ukraine, tweeted earlier this month that Shokin's firing was not about protecting the company Biden was working for. The firing was obviously not because the prosecutor wanted to investigate Burisma and Slashevsky, she wrote. Meanwhile, accounts differ on whether Shokin was poised to prosecute Burisma at the time. In an interview with Ukrainian website Strana.ru this month, Shokin said that the cases were indeed active. However, another guy, Kasko, who had been Shokin's deputy overseeing the international cooperation before resigning in February 2016, citing corruption in the office, produced documents to Bloomberg that under Shokin, the investigation into Burisma had been dormant. There was no pressure from anyone in the U.S. to close cases against Zlochevsky, Kasko told Bloomberg. It was shut by Ukrainian prosecutors in 2014 to 2015. Okay, so we have conflicting accounts as to whether there was an open investigation, but whether it was being acted upon by Shokin or not. 50-50 chance? Do you think that would be okay if it was Don Jr.? Actually, they'd been dragging their feet and they weren't really investigating anyways. Ridiculous. Even if Hunter Biden's position with Burisma had no impact on his policies, were his ties problematic? We found agreement, Ukraine policy expert, that his decision to become director of Burisma presented a conflict of interest. It's not a crime, but it's troubling, said this guy. Pfeiffer, who had reservations about the agreement in the New York Times, said subsequent developments have only confirmed these concerns. It was a mistake for Hunter Biden to join Burisma board, particularly given that the vice president was a senior U.S. official to engage Ukraine. Hunter Biden should have been more mindful of his father's position. Again, take out the fact that Joe Biden literally withheld $1 billion until they fired the prosecutor that was looking into his son's business. Take that out for a second. Just the fact that a leader who is in charge of the Ukrainian policy, as Biden admits, had his son being involved in corrupt businesses owned by corrupt political leaders in the Ukraine. And the same in China, by the way, while China was negotiating deals and advocating for deals with China. Now remember, the fact that Trump the media has been searching far and wide for 3 years for any connection that Trump had to businesses, or his kids have to businesses, to Russia. Because that would be a huge conflict of interest. Yet, here they were, silent, as all this went going on from 2014. No one said a word. Yoshika Harada, the University of Wisconsin professor who previously headed the Center for Russia, East Europe, and Asia, said Hunter Biden's hiring echoes the strategy common with Russia and other parts of the former Soviet Union, which powerful countries' interests try to secure influence on foreign policy by leveraging family members of key leaders. Calling Hunter Biden a private citizen ignores the obvious links to the vice president. Conflict of interest rules should have applied. If Biden is working for the Obama administration on Ukraine, his son should not have been on the board of the company that there could be affected by U.S. policy spearheaded by his father. And it was affected because they literally gave them $1 billion if the prosecutor looking into his son was fired. How is that not? They're saying it could have hypothetically been a conflict of interest. That is literally the definition. You can't get an example more specific. He literally offered $1 billion if they fired the guy looking into his son. Now, PolitiFact's ruling. The viral image said when Hunter Biden was serving as director of Ukraine's largest private gas producer, his father threatened to withhold $1 billion in U.S. aid to the Ukraine if they didn't fire the prosecutor looking into the company. Individual pieces of this assertion's right. Hunter Biden was a director of the company. Joe Biden did leverage U.S. aid to fire the prosecutor, but it overreaches because it assumes that he acted to protect his company and his son was affiliated with. First off, everything in that statement's true, right? Let's say a director to Ukraine's largest private gas producer. Yeah, it's true that Biden was serving as him. His father threatened to withhold a U.S. $1 billion in aid if Ukraine didn't fire That's true. Fire a prosecutor looking into the gas company. Yes, that's true. They say, well, all of it's true, but they think that's shady and we don't. That's what they're saying. So they give it a half-truth. Now, we're halfway through this, and I know this is a long video, and it's a lot to take in. Let's just get back to what's important here. The media is in a tizzy because they're thinking that possibly Trump said to someone in the Ukraine, look, you need to look into Hunter Biden's company's son again, or you need to look into the fact that Joe Biden forced this prosecutor that was looking into it out. And they're saying that's bad because that would be of benefit to Trump and he can't be making promises for that. Again, that's very murky because this is alleged crimes that are being looked into. And you'll see as in the second article I read, talks about how the U.S. is also looking into crimes like that. So it would be cooperation on U.S. investigations as well that are looking into these crimes. But it is cut and dry that Joe Biden, for blatantly saying that him and Obama were cool with withholding $1 billion of aid unless the prosecutor looking into his son's company was fired. And then that resulted in that firing. And then, by the way, his son was, promptly the investigation was shut down afterwards. That is ridiculous. Ridiculous. And the media is going to argue, well, if Trump did this, it would be a benefit to him. But when Biden did that, well, it might not have been a benefit to Biden, so it's no big deal. That is absurd. That is the real story. Keep in mind that the media and the Democrats cheered for the obvious corruption of Biden. Everything they say now, from here on out, where they say Trump should be impeached because of this phone call, right? Trump should be impeached because of the promise he made. That's what they're going to say. That's what Adam Schiff, that's what Jerry Nadler, that's what Pelosi and everyone will say. Trump, it was horrible for Trump to do this. That's what Don Lemon and Cuomo and Anderson Cooper and everyone at the New York Times. That's what they're going to say. I want you to do this little exercise. Take out the name Trump and put in the name Biden. Because that's exactly what Biden did, and they have no problem with it. And Obama. And they knew about it in 2015, and they still, no one was calling for Obama's impeachment. No one was calling for Biden's impeachment. Now, let's move on to the second article. This is from John Solomon at The Hill, who I think's awesome. Now, The Hill is a left-leaning site, slightly left of center. John Solomon, though, is probably more down the middle, or you could even say right-leaning, if I'm going to be honest. He's had great coverage on the FISA abuse scandal and things like that. But anyways, just to be fully open with what this article comes. So a lot of this is going to be rehashed, but there's going to be more added into it. Now, the reason I chose the PolitiFact article is, as I was on message boards talking about this case, and I provided this Hill article, people cited the PolitiFact article as a rebuttal of the Hill article. Now, you saw, did anyone in that PolitiFact article, did it say any of the claims are untrue? No. It just said, we don't have definitive proof that that's the reason that Biden pressured. That's ridiculous. That is a ridiculous claim. That if it was Trump, the very same people that are saying the PolitiFact article debunks the charges against Biden and his son would say, oh, it's Trump. It's clearly Trump's guilty. So anyways, enough stalling. Let's get to the Hill article. 2 years after leaving office, Biden couldn't resist the temptation last year to brag to an audience of foreign policy specialists about Vice President how he stronged the Ukraine into firing its top prosecutor. In his own words, with video camera rollings, Biden described how he threatened the Ukrainian President Poroshenko in March 2016, and that the Obama administration would pull $1 billion in U.S. loan guarantees, sending Soviet Republic towards insolvency if it didn't immediately fire prosecutor Shokin. I said, and this is him repeats it again, but I'll repeat it because it is damning. I said, you're not getting the billion. I'm not going to be leaving here. I'm going to be leaving here in, I think, 6 hours. I looked at them and said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor is not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired, and they put in place someone who was solid at the time. Remember that part. Biden told the Council of Foreign Relations, insisting that President Obama was in on the threat. Interviews with half a dozen senior Ukrainian officials confirmed Biden's account, though they claim the pressure was applied over several months in late 2015 and early 2016, not just 6 hours ahead of one dramatic day. Whatever the case, Poroshenko and Ukrainians' parliament obliged by ending Shokin's tenure as prosecutor. Shokin was facing steep criticism in the Ukraine and among some U.S. officials for not bringing enough corruption prosecutions when he was fired. But Ukrainian officials tell me there was one crucial piece of information that Biden must have known that didn't mention to his audience. The prosecutor he got fired was leading a wide-range corruption probe into the natural gas firm Burisma Holdings that employed Biden's younger son, Hunter, as a board member. U.S. banking records show Hunter Biden's American-based firm, Rosemont Seneca Partners LLC, received regular transfers of one of its accounts, usually more than $166,000 a month, from Burisma from spring 2014 through fall 2015, during a period in which Vice President Biden and the main U.S. official dealing with Ukraine and its tense relationships with Russia. The general prosecutor's official file for the Burisma probe, shared with me by senior Ukrainian officials, showed prosecutors identified Hunter Biden, business partner Devin Archer, and their firm, Rosemont Seneca, as potential recipients of money. Let me read that again. The general prosecutor's official file for the probe into this company, Burisma, shared with me by Ukrainian officials, show that the prosecutors identified Hunter Biden as one of the recipients of the money. So they were looking into Hunter Biden. Shokin, and that was the fired prosecutor, told me in written answers to questions that before he was fired as general prosecutor, he had made specific plans for the investigation that included interrogations and other crime investigation procedures into all members of the executive board, including Hunter Biden. He added, I would like to emphasize presumption of innocence and that he couldn't describe the evidence any further. Now, this is the prosecutor saying, no, I actually was looking into Biden. Other officials had told this author, John Solomon, they showed him documents showing that Biden was named in the prosecutorial evidence that they had. Now, what the other article is saying, well, Shokin's a liar, Shokin's corrupt, so who cares what he says? Okay, we'll see if anyone else backs up that story. William Russo, a spokesman for Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, did not respond to email messages seeking comment. The phone number at Rosemont Seneca Partners was no longer in service. The timing of Hunter Biden and Archer's appointment to Burisma's board had been highlighted in the past by the New York Times and by a conservative author, Peter Schweizer. Although Biden made no mention of his son in the 2018 speech, U.S. and Ukrainian authorities both told me Biden and his office clearly had to know about the general prosecutor's probe of Burisma and his son's role. They noted that Hunter Biden's appointment to the board was widely reported in the American media. The U.S. Embassy in Kiev that coordinated Biden's work in the country repeatedly and publicly discussed the general prosecutor's case against Burisma. So we're to believe Biden had no idea, even though all the media was talking about Biden's son being appointed to this company. Biden just, when he doesn't read newspapers, and when he was sitting at the dinner table, even though he's dealing with corruption in the Ukraine, it never came up that his son was involved with these very people. Great Britain took very public action against Burisma while Joe Biden was working with the government on Ukraine issues. Biden's office was quoted on the record acknowledging Hunter Biden's role in Burisma in a New York Times article about the general prosecutor's Burisma case that appeared 4 months before Biden forced the firing of Shokin. The vice president's office suggested in that article that Hunter Biden was a lawyer free to pursue his own private business deals. So Biden clearly knew. His office admitted 4 months before Shokin was fired that they knew Hunter Biden was working for them. President Obama named Biden the administrator's point man on Ukraine in February 2014 after a popular revolution ousted Russia-friendly President Yanukovych and the Moscow sent military forces to Ukraine's Crimea territory. According to Schweizer's book, Vice President Biden met with Archer, who was a person who's a friend of John Kerry's son, and they were on the board of directors together here. In April 2014, right as Archer was named to the board of Burisma. A month later, Hunter Biden was named at the board to oversee the legal team. But the Ukrainian investigation and Joe Biden's effort to fire the prosecutors overseeing it has escaped without much public debate. Really? Shocking. Most of the general prosecutor's investigative work on Burisma focused on 3 separate cases. And again, don't get bogged down in this. I'll read it though. And most stopped abruptly. This is the important part. Most of the general prosecutor's investigative work on Burisma focused on 3 separate cases. And most stopped abruptly. Oops. Most of the general prosecutor's investigative work on Burisma followed on 3 separate cases, and most stopped abruptly once Shokin was fired. So, Shokin was the one who was supposedly looking into this, regardless if he was doing a good job or not. They got rid of him, and poof, magically, just like that. The corruption. Remember, that's why they got rid of Shokin. Biden was upset that Shokin wasn't looking at corruption enough. And so they get rid of him, and magically, the case against his son's company, bloop, just disappeared. The most promising of the Burisma cases was transferred to a Ukrainian agency closely aligned with the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, known as the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of the Ukraine, according to the case file current general prosecutor Lutsenko. NABU closed the case, and a second case involving improper money transfers in London was dropped when Ukrainian officials failed to file the necessary documents required by the deadline. Really? So we gave this money. The reason we were going to withhold the money, $1 billion, was because Biden said Shokin wasn't meeting proper deadlines and filing to get people prosecuted that are corrupt. And so the replacement failed to meet the deadlines to prosecute people that were corrupt. And it just so happened to be Joe Biden's son that they failed to do that with. The general prosecutor's office successfully secured a multi-million-dollar judgment in a tax evasion case, Lysenko said. He did not say who was the actual defendant in the case. As a result, the Biden family appeared to have escaped the potential for an embarrassing inquiries overseeing the final days of the Obama administration and during an election in which Democrat Hillary was running for president in 2016. But then, as Biden's 2020 campaign ramped up over the past year, Lutsenko, the Ukrainian prosecutor that Biden once hailed as solid, who replaced Shokin, began looking at what happened with the Burisma case and that had been shut down. Now remember, Biden says this guy was corrupt. This prosecutor Shokin was corrupt. So we had to get rid of him, and we placed a solid guy in. Okay, let's see what that solid guy. Biden called him a solid guy. Let's see what this prosecutor has to say. Lysenko told me, while reviewing the Burisma investigative files, he discovered members of the board obtained funds as well as other U.S.-based legal entity, Rosemont Seneca Partners, for consulting services. Lutsenko said some of the evidence he knows about in the Burisma case may interest U.S. authorities, and he would like to present that information to new U.S. Attorney William Barr, particularly the Vice President's intervention. Isn't that interesting? The new prosecutor says, wow, there's evidence of corruption here. And there's evidence that there was shadiness in Biden intervening. I want to talk to the Attorney General. This is Lutsenko quote. Unfortunately, Mr. Biden had correlated and connected this aid with some of the HR personnel issues and changes in the office, Lutsenko said. Nazir Kolodinsky, butchered that name, the lead anti-corruption prosecutor in Lutsenko's office confirmed to me in an interview that part of the Burisma investigation was reopened in 2018 after Joe Biden made his remarks. We were able to start this case again, he said. But he said the separate Ukrainian police agencies that the investigation's corruption has dragged its feet in gathering evidence. Isn't this exactly what the U.S. was so upset about and the rest of the world? Remember that other article? All these people, the Atlantic Council, all these people wagging their fingers saying, this prosecutor in the Ukraine dragged their feet and didn't prosecute corruption. Now that's exactly what the Ukraine's doing after they got rid of the prosecutor. Where are all them shaking their finger now? Where are all them demanding that $1 billion back? We don't see that. It's almost like once they stopped investigating Joe Biden's son, no one cared anymore. He said separate Ukrainian police agency investigate corruption and dragged its feet. We don't see any results from this case 1 year after reopening because of some of the external influence. Isn't that odd? So what someone at the head of the prosecutor's office, the highest prosecutor in the Ukraine, is telling people there are people that are not doing this investigation properly because of external influence. Who is the external influence? Oh, Obama and Joe Biden. Ukraine is in the middle of a hard-fought presidential election, is a frequent target of intelligence operations by Russia, and suffers from rampant political corruption. Thus, many Americans might take the restart of the Burisma case with a grain of salt, and rightfully so. True. But what makes Lutsenko's account compelling is that federal authorities in America, in an entirely different case, uncovered financial records showing just how much Hunter Biden and Archer's company received from Burisma while Joe Biden acted as Obama's point man in the Ukraine. You see that? There's an investigation going on in the United States into this company. Between April 2014 and October 2015, more than $3 million was paid out of Burisma accounts, the account linked to Biden and Archer's Rosemont Seneca firm, according to the financial records placed in a federal court file in Manhattan in an unrelated case against Archer. The bank records show that on most months when Burisma money flowed, 2 wire transfers of $83,000 were sent to the Rosemont Seneca connected account on the same day. The same Rosemont Seneca linked account typically would then pay Hunter Biden one or more payments ranging from $5,000 to $25,000 each. So every month, Joe Biden's son's getting $5,000 to $25,000 from this corrupt company that's being looked into. Prosecutors reviewed internal company documents and wanted to interview Hunter Biden and Archer about why they'd received the payments, according to the interviews. Lutsenko said Ukrainian company board members legally can pay themselves for work if what they do benefits the company's bottom line. But prosecutors never got to determine the merits of the payment to Rosemont because the way the investigation was shut down. As for Joe Biden's intervention in getting Lutsenko's predecessor fired in the midst of the Burisma investigation, Lutsenko suggested that was a matter to discuss with Attorney General Barr. Of course, I would be happy to have a conversation with him about the issue. So the head prosecutor that Biden called a solid guy is saying that there are external pressure, that it's a shame that this was shut down, and that he wants to talk to William Barr about not only the company that Hunter Biden was involved with, but also Joe Biden applying this pressure to get this shut down. That's damning. That's unbelievable. That's the guy Joe Biden called a solid guy. So, what's the argument again? Why? Who was quoted in another article? What Ukrainian prosecutor? Now we know that. So here's the facts we know. Joe Biden's son was involved in some kind of corruption, or was involved in a company being investigated for some kind of corruption. Joe Biden threatened to withhold $1 billion of aid unless they fired the prosecutor looking into his son. For a fact, once that prosecutor was fired, basically the investigation into his son's company were dropped and still not dealt with. Joe Biden said the prosecutor that replaced was a solid guy. That solid guy says there are still external pressures stopping us from investigating this, and that he wants to talk to Attorney General Barr about Joe Biden applying pressure. But somehow still that's no big deal. Now they'll just say, well, Lutsenko, this prosecutor's corrupt too. Everybody's corrupt. We just have to take Biden's word for it. And also, the only defense of this is, well, a bunch of organizations said that the previous prosecutor was corrupt because he never prosecuted corruption. And so now we know that the people that replaced him, where those investigations ended up going, dragged their feet on corruption. And no one said a word. As the now completed Russia collusion investigation showed us, every American deserves the right to be presumed innocent until evidence is made public or its conviction secured, which is true, especially some matters of case involving foreigners. The same presumption should be offered to these people. Nonetheless, hard questions should be answered by Biden as he prepares potentially for 2020, which he is running now. Was it appropriate for your son to do this? Was blah, blah, blah. So you can see the irony here is, again, this is just like the Russia thing, the Russia collusion argument. The argument was Trump tried to get dirt on Hillary from Russians. Meanwhile, the way they were going to prove that is Hillary actually did get dirt on Trump via Christopher Steele through Russians. It was okay for Hillary to get the dirt from Russians on Trump and use that to spy and blah, 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 all of that from Obama's intel agencies to do that. It's okay for Hillary to get dirt on Trump from Russia. It's not okay for Trump to get dirt on Hillary from Russia. Here we got, it's okay for Joe Biden to threaten to withhold aid $1 billion in a company that was investigating his son. That's okay, but it wouldn't be okay for Trump to theoretically, and we don't even know this, maybe withhold aid unless they investigate the corruption of what Biden did. Do you see the insanity of that? Either it's corrupt to promise billions of dollars to a foreign country in something that could end up helping you personally, or it's not. That simple. The media didn't think it was important when Joe Biden did this. They didn't call for his impeachment. They didn't call for Obama's impeachment at all. To this day, they're saying it wasn't a big deal. But for Trump to look into, and again, think of what we know. We know for a fact that this happened with Biden. We have no idea. Only a whistleblower. How many times have we heard someone in the intelligence agency said Trump did something wrong, and it wasn't? How many times has the media reported a bombshell that fell flat in its face? It was a dud. But that's where we're at here. I'm just saying, given the worst case scenario, if it's the worst case scenario, then what Trump did still pales in comparison to what we absolutely know what Joe Biden did. Because it's always going to be more corrupt to say, I want you to, I'm trying to protect myself or those around me from being criminally investigated, versus saying, I want you to criminally investigate people I dislike. Particularly when there's investigations going on to this company and Hunter Biden's business partner in the United States right now. So that's the story. People are going to say over and over, and what they'll say is, they'll just say, well, the Hill's biased. They'll literally say every single group that says this is a shady story is biased. The Hill's biased, Fox News is biased, Trump is biased, Barr is biased, Shokin's biased, who says that he was investigating Hunter Biden. Lutsenko, the guy that Biden called a solid guy. Well, he's not solid now because he didn't say what Biden wanted. Do you see? That'll be everyone. They'll say, no, you have to listen to CNN and the New York Times and PolitiFact. Those are the groups. Those are the only, solid groups, even though we know that they're liars. We know that they're just smear merchants against Trump. But even if we look at them, they don't say anything. They don't have any evidence whatsoever that proves that Joe Biden didn't fire his son, or demand this guy be fired because he was looking into his son. And the crucial fact is, just change the names Hunter Biden and Joe Biden with Don Trump and Eric Trump. Just change those two names. And this would be the biggest bombshell. There'd be Pulitzer Prize given. That's all you would hear on them until Trump would definitely be impeached. He definitely would be. That's all you would hear 24/7. Trump gave a country $1 billion to fire the prosecutor looking into his son. That's all you would hear. They wouldn't be like, well, wait a minute. Let's make sure there weren't other reasons to fire this prosecutor. There's no way they would be saying that. So we'll have to wait and see what the specifics are of this specific allegation. But one good thing that's coming of it is, I hope this shows the people just how corrupt this situation with Obama and Biden was. And then withholding $1 billion of U.S. aid until the person that's looking into Biden's son would be fired. So I know this video was long, but it's a really important issue, and I'm going to go back to this video in future videos because this whistleblower story is going to keep blowing up. So it's going to be important to keep coming back to the actual facts. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe. I'm going to have a link below. Please follow me on Twitter, and also follow me on BitChute. I'll have the links there. And I really would appreciate if you recommend my videos to other people. I think I like my content, but I think I'm doing stuff that other people aren't really talking about, and or I put a new spin on it, such as, I haven't heard anyone talk about Cory Booker, the fact that he admitted to a worse sexual assault than what he's demanding Kavanaugh step down for, or the fact that somehow these New York Times authors in the Kavanaugh situation outed a woman who didn't want to be outed, her name publicly, and then smeared her as a drunk. I don't hear anyone talking about that type of stuff, even in the good people that I watch. So please recommend me other people, like, subscribe, follow me on BitChute and Twitter, and look for me to be putting out more material soon. I think I'm going to be doing a live stream around 2 o'clock today, so look forward to that. So, all right, thanks everyone, and have a good one.